Robert Kesakos is your usual suspect. Welcome back to yet another live broadcast on your favorite football updates channel. It's a pleasure to be back on this beautiful Friday night, the 2nd of January 2026, 32 minutes past the hour of 8 p.m. here in Kampala, Uganda. It's a Friday when we normally come to you a little bit early for our weekend build-up and, of course, routine of a broadcast and things like that. So we'll be looking forward to the weekend amidst all sorts of speculation making the rounds with Chelsea's vacant managerial post. And then, of course, what we expect should be coming in the weekend. We know that the weekend will come with the AFCON round of 16 action there in Morocco. We know the weekend will come with transfer news. We'll be discussing a bit of transfer news. Brenan Johnson has completed his move from North London to South London. So there's that as well. And things like that, in today's broadcast. So do bear with me for the next 1 hour as we go through the discussion today. Otherwise, I hope you've had a wonderful start to your year. I hope there's some positive news coming your way. If not yet, I pray that some positive news does come your way in as far as the new year is concerned. Anyways, allow me to have our audios tested and make sure everything does check out. But it looks like we good to go. Although testing this on my secondary device seems to be giving me some form of white paper, some form of white wall. Okay. That had been scary for a second there. When I'm testing audios, I must get the video too. So in this particular case, as I tested the audio, the video was blank. The frame was there, but nobody was in the frame. So that caught me a bit off guard for a second there. But it looks like we're good to go. But I hope you're all doing well. Somebody asked me to do some football trivia. In as far as the channel is concerned, to get the conversation a bit more going, a bit more entertaining. And for today's trivia, we'll ask the question. We'll ask the question of who scored the first goal of the 2025-2026 Premier League season. Who scored the first goal of the 2026-2025 Premier League season? It's not a poll. I won't give you options, but that's the question. Let me post it in the comment section there for you guys. Who scored the first goal of the 2025-2026 Premier League season? Who is that? You and I are going to have our brains put to the test for to the test. Yeah, so that's the trivia. The question for our trivia: who scored the first goal of the 2025-2026 Premier League season? Do let me know down in the comment section. If you want a hint, I'll give you a hint. The first game of the Premier League season was between Liverpool and AFC Bournemouth on Friday, the 15th of August. So that's the hint I can give you to that effect. But so give me the answers in the comment section. Who scored the first goal of the 2025-2026 Premier League season as we get into it. Anyways, like I said, there's only one place for us to start, and that's to do everything with Chelsea. We know that Chelsea part ways with Enzo Maresca. Quite a bit of a surprise, in my opinion, not something that I would have expected. And it does appear I'm not the only one. There's a couple of other people who share similar sentiments with I in regards to the parting ways of Enzo Maresca with Chelsea. From what we gather is that there was a bit of a rift between the technical team led by Enzo Maresca and the medical department, which, according to multiple reports, is that Chelsea's medical department is independent of the technical team. So whatever happens with the medical team, the technical team has no influence. What do we mean by that? Is that, for example, if a player gets injured, the medical team will solely determine when that player returns to action, and in the form of for lack of a better word, a reintegration into the squad. They'll have a say on how many minutes in terms of load and load management of how much that player should be playing. Now, in recent times, a lot of Chelsea fans have been criticizing Enzo Maresca for making what they've called unworthy, substitutions for chopping and changing the team, which he does a whole lot. Whereas he has a huge part to play in that, in terms of chopping and changing the team. The medical team also has a say in that, in regards to how he's been forced into, he's sort of been backed into a corner when it came to certain players and how he can use them, especially when it comes to players that are returning from injury. I'll give you an example. Let's say Cole Palmer is returning from a groin injury. The medical team could say, yeah, he's good, but he will only play for 45 minutes. That's what we recommend. That's what we suggest as the independent medical team. And then maybe Enzo Maresca is thinking, yeah, he's good for 60 minutes. That's in excess of 15 minutes, maybe even 70 minutes. Ideally, you would think that's the manager's prerogative. Yes, he's received the information from the medical team, the analysts, and everything. Now it's his decision to make how long he plays, whether he comes on for 30 minutes, whether he plays 45, whether he plays 60 or 70, that should boil down to the manager. But essentially, what we are gathering is that a lot of times the medical team was influencing or was interfering or intervening in those kinds of situations to say, withdraw that player, what we said, blah, blah, blah. That's part of what we are getting. So that's one of the reasons as to why eventually there was this rift between certain figures within the club hierarchy and then, of course, Enzo Maresca. We've also come to learn that, the board and composed of about 5 or so people, then you have the Toddy body, who is a day-to-day micromanager of affairs of the club, some of the key decision makers before you get to even Enzo Maresca. Ideally, whereas we were to do comparisons, when you go to Manchester City, where you have Pep Guardiola in charge, whereas he has senior figures at the helm of the club, a lot of times he's going to have a say in what gets done. Similarly, for those of you that care to remember, when Mikel Arteta had just walked through the doors at Arsenal, his role was head coach. And soon after, he was elevated to manager. I think that was in about a year or a year and a half, thereabout. And I remember at the time thinking, oh, isn't that a little too soon for him to be elevated? But perhaps they had figured that the shoe fit him like a glove to feel that, so to manage, the responsibilities of being a manager of the entirety of the team and things like that. So in this particular case, there's a feeling that Enzo Maresca has not had that, a leeway to impact certain decisions, that some of these decisions have been made for him against his own judgment. So particularly when it comes to those players. Of course, the other factor that we cannot ignore is something to do with results. When you look at Chelsea's results, particularly in the Premier League, they had only won one game. I think in the last out of the last 7 Premier League games, that win coming up against Everton by 2-0, excuse me, on the 13th of December, which is around the same time when he came out to voice his concerns or dissatisfaction with some of the figures at Chelsea, saying he felt a lack of support from certain sections of the club. That victory came in the aftermath of Chelsea's defeat against Atlanta in the UEFA Champions League, after which that victory, they went on to win the game in the EFL Cup against Cardiff City by 3-1. For those of you that care to remember, I think Alejandro Garnacho scored a brace in that one. But earlier on, it had been Malo Gusto and Cole Palmer that salvaged the reputation for Chelsea against Everton. So Pedro Neto was the other goal scorer in that Cardiff City game. So really, very, very interesting game. And then after that, they had a 2-2 draw against Newcastle. They got beat by Aston Villa by 2-1. Then the 2-2 draw against Bournemouth. That really, really left things in a poor state. But when you wind things further back, again, you'll find that draw against Arsenal. You'll find the defeat against Leeds United by 3-1. You'll find the goalless draw against Bournemouth. So results were not pretty for Enzo Maresca. So that's another factor. Then now, on wrapping up on the part of results, for one, I did say this, and I do maintain the same stance that for what he has been able to do for this Chelsea team in a year and a half, and that meant, guiding them back to the UEFA Champions League when they finished fourth last season, winning the UEFA Conference League, winning the FIFA Club World Cup in the summer. That in itself bought him, capital, trophy capital and reputational capital, trust capital, in terms of his process to say we are going to stick with him, even if results do not go his way in some moments of this season, given what he's shown us he's capable of doing, then we'll stick with him for the foreseeable future, and we will not rush to conclusions or decisions. So unfortunately, it's not been the case. And I think it's Jamie Carragher who came out to say, in regards to the parting ways of Enzo Maresca or leaving Chelsea, and he said, they lost gold. How do you win the Club World Cup and in less than a year, you're leaving the club? We do not know what happens behind the scenes, but those at the top should have said, come, let's find a way to make it work. Exactly. This is what I was saying a day ago, that before the confirmation came through, maybe over a day ago, that Chelsea should be finding ways to resolve this impasse between the manager and whichever other figures they are clashing with within the club, to say, look here, we'll put our differences to the side and see how we can work out a way forward, at least until the end of the season. How do we make sure you do your job the best way you know how, the way that has delivered results already, in as far as we are concerned? So Yemi Carragher goes on to say that you can't keep pressing. He goes on to say you can't keep pressing, reset, and expect progress. And let's be honest, who are they upgrading to? Another experiment, another payout? The cycle just keeps embarrassing them. I mean, again, we spoke about the cycle when Tony Body comes in and they let go of Thomas Tuchel, Graham Potter comes in, things do not work out. Frank Lampard comes in as an interim. Of course, things went from bad to worse. Mauricio Pochettino comes in, takes on the mantle for one season, they part ways, and then Enzo Maresca, who put pen to paper on a 5-year contract with an option to extend for a further year. Now, for all those sackings, of course, the club is hard to pay, managers to move on. So that is money that you're spending. On top of that, they've been doing it in a phase, in a very, very critical phase, which is a rebuilding phase. Now, if you're setting a foundation for, a storied building, you cannot keep chopping and changing what your stance is on the core pillars of that project. So, for example, we know when they're building the foundation, you'll have those mega pillars that hold, the rest of the other pieces together when it comes to that storied building. So, in this particular case, for Chelsea, what would be the ideal way to build a squad? A manager who you trust to lead you through that process has to be a key part of that. He has to be a key part of that, so that he is involved in how you build and how fast you build. That's why Chelsea have gone on to sign so many players, many of whom that they've not gone on to use, and they eventually sold them. For some, they managed to get a profit. For others, they made losses. For others, they are struggling to move them on. So that is in itself part of the problem. So then, beyond the disagreements and the results, the other issue that Chelsea or the Chelsea hierarchy took concern with was the fact that Enzo Maresca was speaking to other parties in regards to the possibility of taking over from Pep Guardiola at Manchester City. According to reports, he is obligated by his own contract to make those revelations to the club should he be approached, and should he be entertaining those talks. And we know for a fact that he's entertaining those talks. And according to The Athletic, he did inform Chelsea in October and in mid-December that he had conversations with representatives from Manchester City about the possibility of taking over the reins at Manchester City should that position become vacant. So maybe the club sensed a lack of loyalty in a way to that effect. But for me, still, I think at a professional level, we must separate the personal from the professional. I do not think that those talks had affected the way he's gone about managing the team. I do not want to think that in any way for a manager of his profession, of his caliber. Two, I do not think, and you and I both know, that if there is going to be a managerial change at Manchester City, it's not going to happen halfway the season. That's not going to be the case. So it's not like, in any case, he would be more desperate to post good results to further convince his future employers that I'm really, really worth the salt. So that's why I do not want to think that at a professional level, they thought those talks had impacted the way he was going about his job. Unless somebody within the club said, we feel perhaps disrespected, or they had a chip on their shoulder for which to say, no, we are Chelsea. We cannot keep a manager who is talking to our rivals in Manchester City and things like that. So that's how I would want to look at it, So, like I said, we do not know plenty of what happens behind the closed doors, behind the scenes at these clubs, but from what seeps out from the cracks, this is what we are getting as some of the reasons as to why Chelsea and Enzo Maresca could not continue together as the man in charge. So then, like Yemi Karaga put it forward, how many times are you going to keep pressing the reset button? And the other key question he raises is that, who are they upgrading to? Another experiment, he questions. In other words, he looks at Enzo Maresca with all his inefficiencies, if any, depending on who is assessing him, to scan through the managerial market to say, who are you upgrading to? Who is available? Again, for those of you that are regulars on this channel, we had that discussion, scanning through the managers that could be available for that kind of job. And to be honest, to be fair, whereas our pool or sample was not as rich or in depth, it was really, really hard to come by names of respectable or reputable managers that can walk through the Chelsea doors at the moment. If you wanted to have the prodigal return of Thomas Tuchel, he's at the England national team. I don't think he's going to dump his job ahead of a World Cup. If you want to go for Frank Lampard, as a former player, would he say yes to the Chelsea project and chaos? I'm not convinced he would say no. I'm not convinced he would say yes either. In other words, I'm caught in between. The reason as to why I say that is because he has been there as an interim, and beyond his love for the club, a club that he played for so long, I think coming from, was it West Ham, to join them. Beyond that enticement, the prevailing circumstances within Chelsea are not too attractive to say, yeah, take the leap of faith and go help Chelsea out, and that you'll be successful at it. Two is because he's having a very incredible tenure at Coventry City, where last season they competed favorably, almost, fighting for those playoff places, and it wasn't meant to be. This season they've done really, really well. They're aiming for promotion. They are aiming for promotion to the Premier League, and because he's in such a good place with Coventry City, where they are leading the table after 25 games played, 15 wins, 7 draws, and only 3 losses. It's really, really, it's 52 at 52 points. That's about 8 points ahead of a second place Ipswich Town. So that's where they are as a team. So tell me, what would entice him to leave that and then go to this experimental project of Chelsea, where even he himself, in a period of 2 to 3 months before we even reach the end of the season, could be shown the exit? So I do not know that to be the case. Then you look around, Julian Nagelsmann, is he going to dump the German national team for the Chelsea job? Because every time there's a managerial vacancy, he's one of the names that we sample out to say maybe you could look at him. He is a good manager, in my opinion. Are you going to go for Hansi Flick? Is he going to leave Barcelona to come and Chelsea halfway the season? I'm not convinced so. Are you going to go for Simon Inzaghi? Are you going to go and tempt Oliver Glasner away from Crystal Palace? I do not know, But that's all to say that the pool of good managers is very thin or very small. So Chelsea are not going to be picky with their choices. Why? Because there's not plenty of good ones. And speaking of choices, according to Sacha Tavorile, Chelsea have chosen Liam Rosenior as their new head coach. According to Sacha Tavorile, he says discussions are currently advanced to finalize the arrival of the English coach. Clubs already agreed, and Chelsea is finalizing personal terms. Bluco already looking for a replacement for a senior in the coming weeks. Now, here's what is happening. We know that Bluco owns Strasbourg, as they do Chelsea. They put themselves in a bit of a pickle. They've caused an unnecessary disruption at Chelsea, which is going to culminate into an unnecessary disruption at Strasbourg. Strasbourg, who have been doing fairly well in the League One standings, in League One, and have been doing fairly well in as far as the UEFA Conference League is concerned. So really, you look at it and think to yourself, what are they thinking here? Because in the French League One, Strasbourg are in 7th place with 23 points. Of course, that's about what? About 9 points adrift of the top 4, but it's not too bad. They are Strasbourg. So really, I look at it that way. So if indeed it is the case that they are going to proceed to appoint Liam Rosenior, that's going to be a bit unfortunate. Not just for Bluco, but for Strasbourg, because he's a good manager. From the results he's posted, getting them to finish, I think 6th, was it, last season, qualifying for the UEFA Conference League. He worked with players like Andre Santos, who, if he comes, may get himself more playing time. He's had the chance to work with Mano Mamadusa, who is a Chelsea player now, but back on loan to Strasbourg. They wanted to sign Emmanuel Mega from the same club. So that's what is happening with Chelsea. Do let me know what your thoughts are there in as far as things go. But on our trivia question, I see none of you has come through to answer it yet, but we'll keep it there. for the purposes until the end of this podcast, and see if any of you will be able to answer it. But the question, to repeat it for you, is who was the goal scorer for the Premier League? Who scored the first goal of the Premier League this season, 2025-2026? I gave you a hint that that goal was in Liverpool's game on the 15th of August. It was a Friday when Liverpool played FC Bournemouth. So I gave you a hint on that. Quickly, let's move on to Brenan Johnson. Brenan Johnson has completed his switch from North London to South London. The 25-year-old has left Tottenham Hotspur and joined Crystal Palace in a deal worth about £33.5 million. We're talking about a player that scored the only goal of the UEFA Europa League final in 2025 as Tottenham Hotspur beat up against Manchester United by a 0-0 to win the tournament, or to win the trophy. So really, very, very interesting. Like I said, I think we're speaking about Brenan Johnson and subsequently Joshua Zirkzee's links to AC Roma from Manchester United. And I said, well, if you're not utilizing the player, you may as well let them go for a fee and then use that money to invest in the player that you think you'll accommodate playing time, or that you think will meet your demands or your profile of a winger. So Brenan Johnson, I think, is a brilliant acquisition for Crystal Palace. He goes to a team which does not have lots of pressure, perhaps in comparison to Tottenham Hotspur. I think he will thrive there. If he can stay injury-free, he will thrive there. I remember Tottenham Hotspur, I think, signing him from Nottingham Forest when he was a very, very exciting youngster about, I think, 2 years ago. And under Thomas Frank, he's struggled for sufficient playing time. So yeah, we can only wish him the best of luck. But staying with the transfer gossip and speculation, according to Andoni Iraola, he expects Anton Semenyo to play for Bournemouth tomorrow against Arsenal. That game is coming, I think, at 8:30 p.m. East African time. We're going to see what the fixtures will be for match day 20 of the Premier League. We'll go through that before the end of this broadcast. It will be the late kickoff for tomorrow. And then, of course, but according to multiple sources, the clubs, that's AFC Bournemouth and Manchester City, have agreed on all the details pertaining the deal for Anton Semenyo. So we're just waiting for it to happen. So a lot of clubs are making their moves. Things will be happening in the coming days. I told you the other day about Brighton agreeing a surprise deal to resign Pascal Grob from Borussia Dortmund. That deal is almost done. We're just waiting for announcements and things like that. Then also, maybe this came in from a couple of days back when we're not shooting, but according to RMC Sport, FIFA are looking to implement Arsene Wenger's new offside format or system, where a player will only be offside if he is fully past the last defender. Not these things of your eyebrows were ahead, your finger, your heel, the boot, maybe your shoelace was in an offside position, your elbow, your shoulder, your ear, your nose, I don't know if you are wagging your tongue out, it was the one in an offside position. He wants to do away with all that nonsense. For those of you that care to remember, when the video assistant referee system had just been implemented, a lot of time was spent on drawing thin green, blue, and red lines just to see if a player was really, really offside. And I kept saying, we cannot be embroiled in this discussion of he was and he wasn't, based on a shoelace, based on a heel, based on a finger, which is not allowed to use to score, by the way, based on an elbow, based on the tip of a shoulder, that kind of nonsense, you know. So you remember that goal Alejandro Garnacho scored against Arsenal, Gabriel Magalhaes, for which he was praised for being very, very smart. The way he darts inwards to present Alejandro Garnacho to be in an offside position. So that needs to be cut out. Of course, I was happy it was ruled out. That was the Arsenal fan in me. But I also remember Arsenal's goal being ruled out. I think, was it against Stoke City or something? I don't remember exactly, but it had been scored by Alexander Laxalt. And guess what was deemed to be offside? The heel, that's the back of his boot after being magnified. That's how bad it was. So if this is the last defender, you will only be offside, not for being this way, but for being this way. So if you're the last man here and the defender is here, there you're offside. But if it is this, you're not offside. This business of having a tip of the finger inwards and saying that's offside, we'll be doing away with that. I think for me, that will be a commendable change in as far as the offside rule is concerned. Anyways, let's move away from that. The other thing I wanted us to discuss is a suggestion by Rio Ferdinand. Now, unfortunately, I've not had the chance to watch the entirety of the podcast, him sharing his thoughts about AFCON and African players. But he does pose pertinent questions or make, some brilliant suggestions in his submission. One, he does question whether leagues should break off for AFCON, and he's talking about major leagues, or should AFCON be persuaded to be played post-season? And I think it's an interesting discussion to have. Unfortunately, a lot of us on the Black Man's continent, every time, especially with the latter of the suggestion, every time that discussion comes up, our minds are presupposed or are prepositioned to think that, we are heading to the influence of white football. Now, football is interconnected. But the reason as to why I take interest in this is because of the points he raises. He says African players have become so good and African football has become so good and so has improved a lot that a lot of African players are impacting teams and performances and the quality of the game every time they move away to go for AFCON. That there's a drop in the level of competitiveness in the Premier League and other major leagues in Europe when these players go out for AFCON. And I want to agree with him on that. Look at Liverpool. They are without Mohamed Salah. Look at Sunderland. They let go of 6 players to go for AFCON. Look at Manchester United, Bryan Mbeumo, Amadou Diallo, and Nusa Mazraoui, all away. That in itself weakened the Manchester United squad by the virtue of their own performances this season for Man United. When you look around across different teams, and forget, because this is not about the Premier League, it's about global football during the league. So he's asking, should leagues take a break? Because if AFCON, we agree, is played in January and it's only for 1 month, and in this particular case, not even 30 days, maybe 28 days, which is essentially 4 weeks, leagues can take that break. Why or how? One, leagues already take breaks. Spanish La Liga, Italian Serie A, I think the French League One, the German Bundesliga, they take winter breaks. So basically, the winter break would be doubling as the same break for the AFCON. So now, let's assume necessarily those, because it's not to suggest that if AFCON is for 4 weeks, 1 month, then those leagues should take a whole month break. Maybe a whole month break, maybe a little too big to take it. How about you make 3 weeks? And at least majority of the clubs will only miss their players for 1 game week, which is a sacrifice that you can make. But also, if they are taking a 3 weeks break, that means by the time they resume, we're almost at the tail end of the tournament and majority of the teams are out. Maybe we're at the semi-final stage, headed to the final. So that means the only players that will be missing out are of 2 countries involved in a final. Now, for the clubs without those respective players at those 2 teams that have reached the final, of course, will still meet their stars, but it's only for 1 week as opposed to playing 4 weeks without them. You understand how that makes sense. So for me, it's a brilliant suggestion from Rio Ferdinand, and it's a worthy conversation to have in regards to AFCON. But also, the other suggestion is, should we take AFCON to post-season? Those discussions have been had. Those suggestions have been made. And I stand to be corrected. It is a proposal in place. Having moved it from being a 2-year tournament, it's going to 4 years. And while some people voiced their concerns over Africa bending to the needs of white football, or why are we doing away with 2 years? We are Africa, we must be doing things the African way. We just are unaccustomed to change that we think all change is bad. Not all change is bad. I remember when those changes were announced by the CAF president, Patrice Motsepe, as one of those that quickly embraced them and welcomed them, to say that, look here, 4 years is good because we've been in this cycle of, remember, we used to play AFCON in even years. So around 2012, actually around 2011, that's when AFCON decided to go to odd years. So we played the 2012 edition, and which Zambia won. And the following year we played in 2013, which Nigeria won, beating Burkina Faso in the final, and went to the routine of 2 years, but now this time around in odd years. Do you know why that was the case? Do you know why that was the case? Because at one point, AFCON coincided in the same year with the World Cup. That was in 2010. You remember 2006? We had AFCON. That was the World Cup year. So to try and find solutions for that, the decision was made to move from even years to odd years, which was a welcome decision. But now we are saying, let's go to 4 years, to a 4-year cycle. And in this 4-year cycle, there's not going to come a time when you have the World Cup in the same year as the AFCON. Why? Because it's been put around the frame of the year of the Euros. Now, there's a conundrum there, because then you have divided attention in terms of global football, who commands the most attention. For example, we're playing AFCON 2025. The next edition is in 2027, which will be hosted by Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania, known as the Pamoja bid. And then, by CAF's amendments or changes, we'll play AFCON in 2028 before switching to the 4-year cycle, and then move to the 4-year cycle. That means we'll play it again in 2032. World Cup having come in 2030, that will be hosted by Portugal, Morocco, and Spain, with some games played in South America. The beauty about that for me, before we get to the mix of competing for time, is that, one, we've been, basically, you play AFCON in 2025, and as soon as the tournament is done, you're already into the next international break. You're talking about qualifiers for the next edition. I always found issue with that. In other words, AFCON felt like an ending cycle. If it's not the main tournament, it's the qualifiers. Why? Because we only have a space of 1 year to the final tournament. And in that space of 1 year is where you also have the World Cup qualifiers, in some cases. Now, still among the changes, they chose to do away with CHAN and are going to replace it with the African Nations League that will be partaken in by all 54 nations that will be subgrouped, and then they will go on to play a final, depending on the format. So in terms of competition for TV and commercial deals and things like that and attention, if AFCON is played around the same time with the Euros, let's be honest, the Euros are a bigger brand than AFCON. That's the honest bit. It's been well marketed. It has more money. It commands more commercial value. It's Europe. It's more developed than Africa is. That's the honest bit. So there is where we need to have an honest discussion, which for me leaves one thing and one option, that instead of competing for that, because around the same time, you want as many scouts coming to Africa to watch your players, to scout them for better opportunities, whether they were already playing in Europe, whether it's those that are not playing in Europe yet, and otherwise. So for me, in Rio Ferdinand's suggestions or submission, I say, let leagues take a break for AFCON. After all, 3 weeks is not too much to ask for a winter break. So that means that AFCON sticks to a particular calendar that is played from 2nd January until the end of Jan, period. Not this thing of mid-December, late December, blah, blah, blah. I mean, leagues took a break when it was the World Cup 2022. Now, of course, the circumstances were different, and we all understand it's the World Cup. But without drawing too much comparisons, I'm simply saying it's possible. And in this particular case, we're saying take a break during January. And we're not saying the entirety of January. We're saying take a 3 weeks break from your leagues. 2 seasons ago, the Premier League had introduced a fortnight break. That's when you had Arsenal go to Dubai for the warm winter weather training, So, in other words, it's very, very possible. So, instead of 2 weeks, let's make them 3. And what would have been the 4th week, those leagues would resume. And by that time, we are almost at the tail end of the AFCON tournament. And guess what? Those big stars, if any have made it to the final, they'll be essentially missing only 1 game week, maybe 2 games at worst, as opposed to, for example, look at, for example, if let's say AFCON were to be played from 2nd January to, let's say, the 30th January 2026, Chelsea have 9 games to play in January. Arsenal have 9 games to play in January. Manchester City have 9 games to play in January. Newcastle have 9 games to play in January. Now, assuming each of those had 2 to 3 players, African players, and not forget just players that are making squad numbers, but crucial players. You remember the days when Arsenal had Kolo Toure, when they had Bissan Lauren Maya, eventually Emmanuel Shea Adebayo, Alexander Songbilong, and so on and so forth. So I think leagues taking a break is a more sufficient decision. But anyways, let's leave that debate at that. Okay, for our trivia question, the answer, okay, I'll give the answer at the end. I hope I do not forget. But quickly, as we look to wrap things up for today's broadcast. Today, there's action. Make sure you do not miss out on today's action. In as far as Spanish La Liga is concerned, Rayo Vallecano are up against Getafe, while Cagliari take on AC Milan in the Italian Serie A. Toulouse are up against RC Lens, that's in the French Ligue 1. And tomorrow for match day 20 of the Premier League, Aston Villa take on Nottingham Forest at a half past 3 p.m. East African time. Now, for match day 20, teams are going to be facing off with teams that they have not met in the opening 19 games of the season. That's what you should bear in mind. So Aston Villa will be taking on Nottingham Forest at 3:30 p.m., while at 6 p.m. we'll have two games between Brighton and Hove Albion versus Burnley, while Wolverhampton Wanderers will take on West Ham United. And at 8:30 p.m., Bournemouth will be up against Arsenal. There on Saturday. Then on Super Sunday, we'll have many games, as many as 6 games to be played, with Leeds coming up against Manchester United at 3:30 p.m. at Aaron Road. Will be a very difficult game for Manchester United. Guys, I hope I think we'll do the analysis for these games tomorrow. Then quickly, Everton will take on at 6 p.m. There will be 4 games to be played. Everton take on Brentford. Fulham will be up against Liverpool. Newcastle will entertain Crystal Palace, while Tottenham Hotspur will welcome Sunderland. Manchester City in the late kickoff at 8:30 p.m. will be up against Chelsea there in that game. Speaking of Chelsea, still in regards to that particular fixture, let me hope I can find what I'm looking for. But they are under 21 manager, Calm something. I'm trying to remember what that name is. But he's going to be the interim manager to take Chelsea through that game against Manchester City. Meanwhile, West Ham have made inquiries to Chelsea about the possibility of signing Raheem Sterling on loan. Liverpool have agreed a deal to sign 17-year-old Austrian centre-back Ifeanyi Ndukwe for the summer of 2026. Agreement in place, valid from July. Austria Vienna accepted the proposal, and that deal will go through. So, in just a bit, I'm trying to find the other name of the Chelsea under 21 manager. I'm trying to find the exact name. Oh, Jesus Christ. But yeah, Chelsea's under 21 manager, Calm, will be taking them on as the interim boss through that game against Manchester City, as Chelsea finalize on getting a replacement for Enzo Maresca. But meanwhile, Pep Guardiola also spoke about Enzo Maresca leaving Chelsea, and he said, "Let me say, Chelsea, from my point of view, have lost an incredible manager, an incredible person, but it's a decision from the hierarchy of Chelsea, so nothing to add." That was him. And then he was asked whether whether Manchester City have had talks with Enzo Maresca about taking over, and he said, "No idea. You have, I'm pretty sure, more information than me." For him, he said he's happy at Manchester City and he's still under contract. I remember him making a bit of a joke saying, "I'm sure some of you are tired of me. I mean, it's been long. It's been 10 years." He joked on that in that regard. But yeah. So that's Pep Guardiola reacting to the departure of his apprentice from Chelsea there, and we'll have to wait and see how things develop in the coming days for Chelsea. But also expect a quick activity to be happening in the next couple of days, as Chelsea seek to find a solution. And meanwhile, the answer to our trivia question for who scored the first goal of the Premier League season 2025-2026, that player was Hugo Ekitike as he scored against AFC Bournemouth on his Premier League debut for Liverpool. So he was the goal scorer for the first goal of the season for this season. So that was the trivia question that some of you ought to have answered, although you failed. I'd want to assume is because you did not know the answer. Anyways, guys, it's been a pleasure doing this with you for the last 50 minutes. Allow me to wrap the discussion here, and I will continue with it tomorrow morning as we get into the in-depth of the previews for the weekend action that will be coming our way. Stay blessed, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye for now.